conference room erupted into applause the moment the voting results appeared on the screen. Congratulations, Ms. Laura Bennett. Effective immediately, you are the new Chief Executive Officer. I sat at the far end of the polished walnut table without moving. No surprise, no protest, no anger, just silence. Laura smiled with perfect humility, one hand pressed against her chest, as though she had never expected this honor. I only accepted because the company needs stability, she said softly. After Mr. Ethan Cole voluntarily resigned this morning, someone had to step forward. Every eye turned toward me. Some carried pity. Most carried relief. A few carried satisfaction. The resignation letter appeared on the projector. My signature rested neatly at the bottom. Perfect. Too perfect. The chairman adjusted his glasses. Mr. Cole, thank you for your years of dedication. I simply nodded. I hope Horizon Dynamics continues to succeed. Several executives exchanged confused glances. That wasn't the reaction they expected. Laura's smile froze for less than a second. She had rehearsed an argument. She had prepared to crush my objections in front of everyone. Instead, I stood, collected my notebook, closed the leather cover. Congratulations. That was all. The room remained silent. Someone whispered behind me. That's it. Another executive frowned. He isn't even fighting? Laura quickly recovered. Ethan. She wore the same expression she had used for years whenever she wanted investors to believe she cared about me. You built this company with me. I hope there are no hard feelings. I looked at her. Not with hatred. Not with affection. Simply with recognition. I sincerely wish you success. Those words unsettled her more than shouting ever could. Because they weren't entirely true. Success required something she had never valued. Trust. I walked toward the door. Behind me, applause resumed. The sound echoed through the hallway after I left. The elevator doors closed. Only then did I allow myself one slow breath. My phone vibrated. Unknown number. I answered. This is Ethan. A calm, elderly voice replied. Mr. Cole. Yes. This is Richard Lawson. I smiled faintly. I've been expecting your call. There was a short pause. I heard today's board meeting has concluded. It has. And I no longer work there. Another pause. I see. His voice remained steady. Then I suppose you're free to discuss our partnership. I am. Excellent. The line disconnected. That conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. Yet if anyone inside that boardroom had heard it, they would have realized the company they celebrated inheriting had already lost the one thing keeping it alive. 3 hours earlier, Laura had entered my office carrying 2 coffees. She smiled the way she always did before asking for something. You've barely slept. I've been busy. She placed 1 cup beside me. You work too hard. I know. Her eyes wandered across the financial reports scattered over my desk. Sales falling. Supply contracts expiring. Foreign competitors entering the market. Anyone reading those reports would panic. Laura didn't. Because she believed she had already won. She sat across from me. The board is worried. I expected that. They think you're becoming difficult. I almost laughed. Difficult. After spending 11 years solving everyone else's disasters. They're asking you to step aside. I know. Her fingers tightened around the coffee cup. You know? I've known for weeks. She searched my face carefully, trying to determine whether someone had warned me. Nobody had. They simply underestimated how carefully I observed people. I noticed who stopped making eye contact, who suddenly canceled meetings, who avoided discussing quarterly projections. People preparing betrayal always change their routines first. Laura leaned forward. If you resign peacefully, they'll give you generous compensation. I don't need compensation. You deserve something. I already have what I need. She looked confused. That confusion disappeared quickly. You've always been rational. I try. So, she slid a folder toward me. Would you sign? Inside waited the resignation letter. Fresh ink. Legal formatting. Prepared long before today's conversation. She had forged several drafts before choosing this one. I knew because one of the assistants accidentally printed an earlier version 2 days ago. I had seen it. Said nothing. Instead, I quietly removed every active negotiation file from Horizon's internal servers. Legally, since they belonged to me. Especially one file. Project Atlas. The only project capable of carrying the company through the coming economic collapse. Laura never even noticed it disappear. She thought profits came from current contracts. She never understood they merely delayed bankruptcy. Future survival depended on Atlas. She never asked why I spent 18 months personally negotiating it. Now, it belonged elsewhere. She pushed a pen toward me. Ethan. I picked it up. Signed without hesitation. Laura blinked. You're serious? Yes. You aren't going to challenge this? No. She almost looked disappointed. You've changed. No. I placed the pen beside the folder. I've simply stopped protecting people from the consequences of their own decisions. Her smile faded. What does that mean? It means exactly what I said. She stared another few seconds before forcing another pleasant expression. I'm sorry things ended this way. They haven't ended. What? You'll understand eventually. I stood, walked past her. She watched me leave my own office for the final time. She thought she had just won a kingdom. She never noticed the foundation disappearing beneath it. Rain covered the city by evening. The skyline blurred behind sheets of water as I entered a modest office occupying only half of a renovated warehouse. Compared to Horizon's glass headquarters, it looked insignificant. That was intentional. Richard Lawson stood beside the window, his silver hair illuminated by the city's lights. He didn't shake my hand immediately. Instead, he studied me. You don't seem like a man who just lost everything. I didn't. He smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. We sat across a simple wooden table. No assistants. No lawyers. Just 2 cups of tea. Richard slid a thick folder toward me. Atlas. I opened it. Every page exactly where I had left it. Months of research. Supply chain redesign. International logistics. Emergency manufacturing agreements. Alternative financing structures. Plans built for an economic downer nobody else believed was coming. Richard leaned back. Your former board rejected this proposal. They called it overly cautious. They said preparing for a recession would scare investors. They preferred quarterly numbers. He nodded knowingly. Most executives manage reports. You manage storms. Silence settled between us. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. Richard finally asked the question everyone else avoided. Why didn't you fight? I looked through the rain-covered window. Would they have listened? No. They had already decided who the villain was. And you accepted it. I accepted reality. He folded his hands. That's uncommon. Arguing with people determined to misunderstand you only wastes energy. Richard laughed quietly. I've spent 40 years learning that lesson. He opened another document. Our agreement remains exactly as discussed. He paused. Unless you've changed your mind. I haven't. He pushed a contract across the table. Unlike the resignation letter earlier that morning, this signature actually mattered. I signed. Richard signed after me. He extended his hand. Welcome. I shook it firmly. Thank you. At that moment, Horizon Dynamics officially lost Atlas forever. Meanwhile, across the city, champagne flowed through Horizon's executive lounge. Laura lifted a crystal glass. To new beginnings. The executives cheered. One director laughed. I honestly expected Ethan to cause trouble. So did I. Laura smiled. He understands when it's time to move on. The finance director approached. There is one issue. What? We can't locate several negotiation files. Laura frowned. Probably archived. I checked. They're gone. She remained calm. They'll turn up. Another manager joined them. The Lawson Group requested confirmation regarding tomorrow's meeting. Laura smiled confidently. Tell them I'll attend personally. The assistant hesitated. They specifically requested Mr. Cole. Silence. Laura replied smoothly. I'm the CEO now. I'll explain the leadership transition. The assistant nodded uneasily before leaving. Laura's smile weakened for only a moment. She convinced herself it wasn't important. After all, clients worked with companies, not individuals, didn't they? The following morning, Richard and I waited inside a private meeting room overlooking the harbor. 9 o'clock. No one from Horizon arrived. 9:15. Laura entered confidently, accompanied by 2 senior executives. She extended her hand toward Richard. I'm Laura Bennett, Horizon's new CEO. Richard remained seated. I know. She blinked. We're excited to continue discussing Atlas. There won't be any discussion. I'm sorry. Richard turned toward me. Our agreement has already been finalized. Laura slowly looked in my direction. For the first time since yesterday, her confidence cracked. She laughed lightly. Ethan, this isn't funny. It isn't. She looked back at Richard. There must be some misunderstanding. There isn't. Horizon owns Project Atlas. I quietly answered. No. It was my intellectual property until yesterday. I transferred it legally. Her face turned pale. You can't be serious. I am. One of her executives stepped forward. Mr. Cole, Horizon invested resources into that project, and Horizon rejected it. I met his eyes calmly. You documented that decision yourselves. Richard opened a folder. The legal review was thorough. There is no dispute. Laura's breathing became uneven. You planned this. No. You forced this. No. You wanted revenge. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I shook my head. If I wanted revenge, I would have stayed. The room fell silent. Those words struck harder than any accusation, because everyone present understood their meaning. I hadn't taken anything from Horizon. I had simply stopped giving. And sometimes, the absence of one person's quiet work revealed how fragile an empire truly was. Outside the meeting room, dark clouds gathered over the harbor. Inside, nobody noticed the financial storm already moving toward the city. Except me. I had spent 18 months preparing for it, and I was done saving people who had chosen not to listen. The first headline appeared 4 days later. Horizon Dynamics loses strategic partnership to new firm. It was buried halfway down the business section, written in the detached tone journalists used when they sensed a larger story but lacked enough evidence to tell it. Most people ignored it. The market did not. By lunchtime, Horizon stock had fallen 6%. I closed the article without satisfaction. Consequences had begun. There was no need for me to push them. Richard looked over from across the conference room. You expected this? I expected something worse. He raised an eyebrow. Worse. The market still believes Horizon's problems are temporary. And they aren't. They've mistaken a crack in the wall for the collapse of the foundation. Richard leaned back. You sound certain. I built that foundation. Silence settled between us. The meeting continued with discussions about production schedules, logistics, and hiring. Unlike Horizon's endless presentations full of polished phrases, nobody here cared about appearances. Every decision ended with one question. Will it still work if the market gets worse? If the answer was no, we started over. For the first time in years, I wasn't defending optimism. I was building resilience. It felt peaceful. Across town, Horizon was discovering what I had quietly carried alone for years. Why wasn't this renewal completed? Laura threw the contract onto the conference table. The procurement director swallowed nervously. Mr. Cole always handled that supplier personally. Then call them. We did. And they've signed exclusively with Lawson Industrial. Another silence. Laura forced herself to remain composed. What about East Harbor Components? They also declined renewal. Why? They said. The director hesitated. They only negotiated with you because of Mr. Cole. Laura's fingers tightened around her pen. Ridiculous. No, ma'am. They specifically requested him. Another executive cleared his throat. There are 6 more suppliers with similar responses. Laura looked around the room. Does anyone have a solution? Nobody answered. Not because they didn't care. Because they genuinely didn't know. For years they had believed relationships formed naturally. They never noticed I spent weekends attending factory anniversaries, visiting warehouses after floods, helping suppliers renegotiate loans, and solving problems that never appeared in quarterly reports. Trust didn't appear on balance sheets, but it determined whether people answered your calls during difficult times. Laura finally slammed the table. Then we'll find new suppliers. The operations director nodded uncertainly. It may take months. We don't have months. That evening my phone rang. The screen displayed a familiar name. Daniel Brooks, former operations manager. I answered. Ethan. His voice sounded exhausted. Can we talk? You already are. I mean, in person. I considered it. There's a cafe near Riverside Park. I'll be there. Daniel arrived 20 minutes late. His suit looked wrinkled. His eyes carried shadows that hadn't existed last week. He sat down heavily. I don't know where to start. You don't have to. He stared at his untouched coffee. I voted against you. I know. You knew? The board vote wasn't secret. It was supposed to be. I smiled faintly. Nothing stays secret inside a company. He rubbed his forehead. I thought Laura could manage. I know. I was wrong. I remained silent. That somehow made his guilt heavier. Finally, he looked at me. Why didn't you tell us? Tell you what? That everything depended on you. I shook my head. It never depended on me. Then what? It depended on people working together. His expression twisted. You were holding everything together. No, I was filling the cracks. And now everyone can finally see the building. Daniel laughed bitterly. You always speak in riddles. No. I stirred my tea slowly. I just stopped making excuses for people. He looked away toward the river. Laura blames you. I'm sure she does. She says you sabotaged Horizon. What do you think? He answered without hesitation. I think you simply left. That was enough. Not agreement. Not loyalty. Just honesty. Sometimes honesty was more valuable. He reached into his briefcase and slid an envelope across the table. I shouldn't be giving you this. I didn't touch it. What is it? Minutes from several private board meetings. My eyes narrowed. They discussed removing you months before they acted. I assumed as much. You aren't curious? I don't need confirmation to know who someone is. Daniel sighed. Open it anyway. I did. Inside were printed transcripts, emails, voting records, notes written in the margins. One sentence caught my attention. Keep Ethan occupied until Atlas can be transferred under Laura's authority. I closed the file. Daniel watched my reaction carefully. Aren't you angry? No. He frowned. How can you not be? Because they failed. Daniel stared at me as though he had never truly known the man who had shared an office floor with him for nearly a decade. You aren't pretending? No. They tried to steal your work. They stole what they understood. And Atlas? They never understood Atlas. He leaned back, letting out a slow breath. I came here expecting rage. I've already spent enough years carrying everyone else's emotions. The waiter placed fresh tea on our table. Neither of us touched it immediately. Daniel lowered his voice. The board thinks you hid information. I documented everything. They ignored it. They're saying the documents were incomplete. They're rewriting history. He gave a bitter smile. They've become very good at that. I looked toward the river where an old cargo ship moved steadily through the evening mist. People rewrite history because they can't rewrite consequences. Daniel followed my gaze. I don't think Horizon survives this year. I know. You could still help. That question lingered between us. I finally turned back to him. Do you know why I worked 18-hour days? He shook his head. Because every time someone failed, I stepped in before anyone noticed. I remember. I convinced clients not to leave. I negotiated emergency loans. I repaired supplier relationships. I even rewrote failed proposals overnight so departments could claim success. Daniel's face slowly lost color. I thought those were team efforts. I wanted everyone to believe that. Why? Because companies built around one person eventually collapse. A long silence followed. And yet, he looked around helplessly. That's exactly what's happening. I smiled sadly. No, it isn't collapsing because I left. It's collapsing because everyone believed someone else would always save them. The following week, market conditions shifted abruptly. A major international banking crisis tightened credit across several industries. Orders slowed. Manufacturers delayed payments. Transportation costs climbed almost overnight. Financial analysts called it temporary. I knew better. Atlas had been designed specifically for this environment. Lawson Industrial activated every contingency plan we had prepared. Alternative suppliers, flexible production, regional warehousing, cash reserves. Nothing looked dramatic. That was the point. Preparation rarely looked impressive. It simply made disasters appear smaller. At Horizon headquarters, panic spread floor by floor. Another client canceled. We're out of imported components. The bank delayed our credit extension. Production stops Friday if shipments don't arrive. Laura listened to report after report until the room became unbearably quiet. She looked toward the finance director. Tell me something positive. He couldn't. Instead, he slid a report across the table. Our liquidity, his voice faltered, is worse than expected. Laura scanned the numbers. Impossible. These weren't the projections she had approved. They've changed. No. The finance director swallowed. Mr. Cole's emergency reserve fund is gone. What reserve fund? Silence. What reserve fund? He looked genuinely confused. We assumed you knew. I asked you a question. Ethan maintained a private contingency account authorized by the previous chairman. Why wasn't I informed? Because. He hesitated. Only he managed it. Laura felt something cold settle in her chest. How much? Enough to stabilize operations for 6 months. And now, it expired when he resigned. The room seemed to shrink. Nobody spoke. Finally, Laura whispered, "Why did he never tell us?" No one answered. Because deep down, they all knew. She had never asked. That night, Laura stood alone inside the executive office that had once belonged to me. Everything remained immaculate. Books aligned perfectly, desk spotless. Even the old fountain pen still rested in its holder. She opened drawers one after another, looking for something. Anything. Hidden files. Passwords. Notes. Instructions. There were none. Only one small envelope remained inside the lowest drawer. Her name was written across the front. Laura. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside rested a single sheet of paper. In my handwriting. Leadership isn't measured by how well people obey you. It's measured by whether they still trust you when following you becomes difficult. If you're reading this after replacing me, then I hope you've already built that trust yourself. Because mine was never transferable. She read the letter twice. Then a third time. For the first time since becoming CEO, she realized I had never intended it as a farewell. It had been a warning, one she had been too eager to hear. Outside her office window, the lights of the city glittered as usual. From a distance, everything still looked stable. Inside Horizon, however, invisible fractures had begun spreading through every department. And for the first time, Laura understood a terrifying truth. No matter how many times she called my number now, I was never coming back. The crisis announced itself on a Monday morning. Not with sirens, not with shouting, with silence. The financial news channels, usually obsessed with quarterly earnings and celebrity CEOs, interrupted their regular programming with a single headline that spread across every screen in the country. Global credit markets freeze as major banks halt corporate lending. Factories paused expansion plans overnight. Investors stopped returning calls. Shipping companies demanded advance payments instead of 30-day terms. The storm had arrived exactly as Atlas predicted. Richard stood in front of the large screen in our operations center. This is worse than analysts forecast. I studied the live market data. No. He looked at me. It's exactly what they forecast. They simply assumed it wouldn't happen. He let out a quiet laugh. You always choose your words carefully. Reality usually deserves careful words. Our planning room buzzed with controlled urgency. Department heads updated logistics. Warehouse managers confirmed inventory. Procurement teams activated secondary suppliers. No one panicked. Every movement had already been rehearsed months ago. Preparation removed drama from disaster. My phone vibrated repeatedly. 23 missed calls. Most came from numbers I recognized. Former executives. Old department heads. 2 board members. Laura. I placed the phone face down. Richard noticed. Aren't you going to answer? No. Why not? They don't want advice. What do they want? They want the version of me that solved problems without asking why they existed. He nodded slowly. And that version? I left Horizon the day I signed my resignation. Across the city, Horizon's headquarters no longer resembled the polished corporate palace it had been only weeks earlier. Employees crowded the hallways. Voices overlapped. Phones rang endlessly. The emergency executive meeting had started 40 minutes late because no one could agree on which disaster deserved attention first. Laura stood before the projection screen. We need immediate cost reductions. The finance director looked exhausted. We already cut discretionary spending. Then reduced staffing. The human resources director stiffened. We've already frozen hiring. I'm talking about layoffs. Silence. The operations director spoke carefully. If we lay off production teams now, we'll reduce costs. We won't have capacity if orders recover. Laura turned sharply. What orders? No one answered. Because there weren't any. She pressed both hands against the conference table. Fine. What alternatives do you have? Again, silence. Then Daniel finally spoke. There is one. Every eye turned toward him. We could reopen negotiations with Lawson Industrial. Laura's jaw tightened. They're our competitor. They're also the only company still accepting new manufacturing partnerships. Another executive added quietly. They're the industry's lifeline now. The words landed like stones. Only 3 weeks earlier they had laughed when I left. Now they were discussing whether the company I helped build could survive by asking my new employer for help. Laura stared at the financial reports without seeing them. I'll arrange a meeting. Daniel hesitated. I don't think Richard Lawson will meet us. She looked up. Why? He refused every request. Her expression hardened. Then he'll meet me personally. That afternoon, my assistant entered my office. Mr. Cole. Yes. Horizon Dynamics has requested an emergency negotiation. I continued reviewing shipment forecasts. Decline. They marked it urgent. So did the market. She smiled faintly. I thought you'd say that. She left without another word. An hour later she returned. They've requested mediation through the Chamber of Commerce. Decline. They're requesting only 30 minutes. I looked out the window. Rain clouds gathered over the harbor. They had 11 years. She nodded once and quietly left. No triumph. No cruelty. Just boundaries. For years I had mistaken availability for responsibility. Not anymore. That evening I drove home earlier than usual. The apartment felt strangely peaceful. No emergency emails. No midnight conference calls. No impossible deadlines waiting beside dinner. I cooked for myself. Simple noodles. Vegetables. Tea. Halfway through the meal, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, Laura stood in the hallway. She looked nothing like the composed executive who had accepted applause in the boardroom. Dark circles framed her eyes. Her tailored suit was wrinkled. Rain clung to her hair. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered, "You wouldn't answer." "I know. Can I come in?" "No." The word wasn't angry. It was calm. She closed her eyes briefly. "I just need 10 minutes." "I don't think you do." "Ethan." She looked directly at me. "Please." The hallway remained silent except for the distant hum of the elevator. Laura stood beneath the dim ceiling light, water dripping from the edge of her coat onto the polished floor. She had once possessed the effortless confidence of someone who believed every room would eventually bend to her will. That confidence had disappeared. I folded my arms. "What do you need?" She looked past me into the apartment. "You've changed." "No." I finally stopped confusing kindness with obligation. Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she lowered her gaze. "The company is falling apart. I've heard. You knew this would happen. I knew what the risks were. You could have warned us." "I did." "When?" "For 18 months." She looked up sharply. "I don't mean those reports." "Then you don't mean warnings." She flinched. The truth often sounded harsher than accusations. "I need your help." "No." She blinked, as though the answer itself was impossible. "You didn't even think about it." "I already did." "Ethan." She stepped closer. "Thousands of employees will lose their jobs." "I know. They don't deserve this." "They don't." "Then help them." For a brief moment, I almost saw the woman I had trusted years ago, the woman who believed we were building something together. Then I remembered the resignation letter, the boardroom applause, the months of secret meetings, the signatures collected behind closed doors. "You aren't asking for the employees." She froze. "You're asking for Horizon." You want me to carry the weight again." Her shoulders slowly dropped. Neither of us spoke. Finally I asked, "Do you remember our first office?" She looked confused. "The basement." "Yes." "The roof leaked every winter." A faint smile appeared despite herself. "We used buckets. And old towels. You slept there for 3 nights after the server crashed." "I remember." "So do I." I looked at her steadily. "Back then we solved problems together." She nodded weakly. "Somewhere along the way." I continued, "You stopped asking how much I was carrying." Tears formed in her eyes. "I thought you enjoyed it. I was surviving it." She covered her mouth with one trembling hand. "I never realized." "I know." The words carried no bitterness, only exhaustion. She wiped her eyes quickly. "So that's it?" "Yes." "You'll watch us collapse?" I answered after a long pause. "I'll watch you face the consequences of decisions you insisted were correct." She looked at me for what felt like an eternity. Then she whispered, "I don't think I ever understood you." "No. You understood what I could do for you." Those words ended the conversation. She nodded once, turned slowly, walked toward the elevator without looking back. The doors closed. I remained standing in the hallway long after she disappeared. Not because I regretted my decision, because endings rarely felt satisfying, even when they were necessary. The next morning, Richard entered my office carrying a thin folder. "Horizon has begun selling assets." "So soon?" "They're running out of cash." He placed the folder on my desk. "They've also lost 2 more board members." I opened the file. Resignation letters. Emergency financing requests. Supplier defaults. One page caught my attention. An internal memo. Employee confidence has fallen to historic lows. Several senior managers intend to resign within the month. I closed the folder. Richard studied my expression. No victory? There isn't one. They betrayed you. They also built part of my life. He nodded thoughtfully. That makes this harder. It makes it real. Richard walked toward the window. The industry keeps asking why Lawson remained stable while everyone else panicked. And what do you tell them? The truth. He smiled. I tell them stability wasn't built during the crisis. It was built long before anyone believed one was coming. Outside, another wave of grim financial headlines spread across the city. Inside Horizon, executives still searched for someone to blame. Inside Lawson, people quietly continued working. The difference had never been intelligence. It had never been luck. It had been one simple choice repeated over years. Prepare or pretend. And at last, everyone was beginning to see which choice carried the greater cost. The invitation arrived on a Thursday morning. Not from Horizon. Not from Laura. From the National Corporate Governance Commission. A formal hearing. Mandatory attendance. Subject: allegations concerning Horizon Dynamics leadership transition and fiduciary conduct. Richard looked up from the letter after reading it twice. They're finally investigating. They have to. What changed? I slid another document across the table. A newspaper article. 3 institutional investors file joint complaint after Horizon loses 68% of market value. When people lose trust, I said quietly, they look for someone to blame. Richard nodded. And eventually they start asking the right questions. The hearing room felt colder than I remembered. No cameras were allowed inside, but representatives from every major investment fund filled the gallery. Lawyers whispered to one another. Board members avoided eye contact. Laura sat across the room. She looked composed. Too composed. The kind of composure that required constant effort. When our eyes met, she didn't look away. Neither did I. The chairwoman of the commission adjusted her microphone. This hearing concerns the removal of Mr. Ethan Cole, the subsequent transfer of executive authority, and representations made to shareholders. A lawyer representing Horizon stood first. Mr. Cole voluntarily resigned. I did. The room shifted slightly. Several heads lifted. The lawyer smiled. So there is no dispute regarding your resignation? No. His confidence grew. You signed the document willingly. I signed the document presented to me. Exactly. He turned toward the commissioners. The transition was therefore lawful. I remained silent. The chairwoman looked at me. Mr. Cole, do you contest the legality of your resignation? No. The lawyer smiled wider. For a moment, he believed the matter was over. Then the chairwoman asked the next question. Do you contest the circumstances surrounding it? Yes. The room fell completely still. She folded her hands. Please explain. I took a slow breath. I was removed after months of undisclosed meetings. No performance review was conducted. No strategic evaluation was shared. Multiple directors privately coordinated a leadership transition while requesting I continue negotiating critical contracts. The Horizon lawyer interrupted immediately. Objection. Speculation. Daniel stood from the witness section. I can verify that statement. Every head turned toward him. Laura's face lost color. The chairwoman nodded. You may proceed. Daniel walked to the witness stand carrying several folders. I served as operations manager. I attended multiple executive meetings. He placed printed documents on the evidence table. These are board minutes, email records, and internal memoranda. The lawyer stepped forward quickly. We object to their authenticity. Daniel met his eyes calmly. They came from Horizon's own archive. A forensic specialist, already appointed by the commission, examined the documents. After several tense minutes, he looked toward the panel. The metadata appears consistent. The room erupted into whispers. Laura closed her eyes briefly. For the first time, she understood the investigation wasn't based on rumors. It was based on records. One email appeared on the main screen. Its subject line was painfully simple. Leadership Transition Timeline. The chairwoman read aloud. Delay formal removal until Atlas negotiations conclude. Another line appeared beneath it. Ensure Ethan remains responsible for all external partnerships until replacement is finalized. Silence. One commissioner removed his glasses slowly. So while planning to remove Mr. Cole, he looked toward the former board chairman. You continued assigning him responsibility for securing the company's future. The chairman shifted uncomfortably. It was operationally necessary. No. The commissioner's voice hardened. It was ethically indefensible. The Horizon attorney attempted to redirect the discussion. Even if procedural mistakes occurred, they do not explain the company's financial collapse. I agree. Every eye turned toward me. The attorney frowned. You agree? I do. He hesitated. Then you admit your departure caused the crisis? No. I stood. The crisis already existed. The market collapse exposed it. I simply wasn't there to conceal it anymore. The room became silent again. I continued. For years I negotiated emergency financing. I repaired supplier relationships. I maintained reserve funds. I personally handled clients the company considered routine. I documented every recommendation. Many were rejected. A commissioner leaned forward. Why didn't the board know the extent of your responsibilities? I intentionally distributed credit. Because healthy companies shouldn't depend on one person. He nodded thoughtfully. And did Horizon become healthy? I looked toward Laura. No. It became comfortable. Those words lingered in the room long after I finished speaking. The forensic accountant then presented another report. Horizon's internal records show that Mr. Cole established multiple contingency measures over several years. Reserve funds, alternative suppliers, risk analyses, emergency logistics. Each recommendation had either been delayed, reduced, or dismissed. One comment attached to an executive review drew visible reactions from the panel. Recommendation declined. Excessive caution may reduce investor confidence. The commissioner looked directly at Laura. Did you support this decision? She answered honestly. Yes. Why? I believed growth required confidence. And now? Laura lowered her eyes. I confused confidence with denial. No one spoke. There was nothing left to argue. Only consequences remained. Outside the hearing, reporters crowded behind security barriers. Questions flew in every direction. Mr. Cole, did you plan Horizon's collapse? I stopped walking. No. Then why didn't you save the company? I looked toward the crowd. Because leadership isn't proving you're indispensable. It's making sure others can succeed without you. Another reporter asked, do you hate the people who betrayed you? I considered the question carefully. No. Hatred keeps you tied to yesterday. I chose tomorrow. I walked away before any further questions could follow. That evening, the commission released its preliminary findings. No criminal fraud, but severe failures of governance. Undisclosed coordination, misrepresentation to shareholders, negligence in risk oversight. Within hours, Horizon's remaining independent directors resigned. The former chairman stepped down. Several institutional investors announced civil lawsuits. Laura submitted her resignation before midnight. Not because anyone demanded it, because there was nothing left to lead. She stood alone in the executive office one final time. The room was almost empty. The awards remained on the shelves. The city still glittered beyond the glass. But the applause that had welcomed her weeks earlier had vanished. She quietly placed her access card on the desk. For a long moment, she stared at the chair she had fought so hard to claim. Then she whispered to the empty room. I won the position, and lost everything that made it worth having. She turned off the lights, closed the door, and walked away without looking back. Spring arrived quietly. The headlines changed before people did. The financial panic that had dominated every news broadcast slowly gave way to stories about recovery, restructuring, and companies adapting to a harsher economy. Lawson Industrial appeared often, not because we expanded recklessly, because we remained steady. Journalists called it remarkable. Richard always corrected them. It isn't remarkable. It's preparation. He refused every award ceremony that celebrated visionary leadership. Instead, he insisted department managers receive recognition. Warehouse supervisors, procurement teams, engineers, people whose names never appeared in newspapers. One afternoon, he knocked lightly on my office door. You have visitors. I wasn't expecting anyone. I know. He smiled knowingly. I think you'll still want to see them. 3 familiar faces waited in the conference room. Daniel, Maya Chun, Olivia Foster, all former Horizon managers. They stood as I entered. No one spoke immediately. Finally, Maya broke the silence. We resigned. I nodded. I heard. Daniel gave a tired laugh. News travels fast. It usually does. Olivia looked around the room. It's different here. What do you mean? There aren't any luxury offices. No reserved executive parking. No one seems afraid. Richard happened to walk past the open door. He overheard the last sentence and smiled. Fear is expensive. After greeting them politely, he continued down the hallway. The three exchanged amused looks. Daniel finally placed a folder on the table. We aren't asking for jobs. I know. We came because. He searched for the right words. We wanted to apologize. I remained quiet. Maya stepped forward. When the board began isolating you, I noticed. I convinced myself it was politics. Olivia nodded. I stayed silent because I thought speaking up wouldn't matter. Daniel sighed heavily. I chose comfort. None of them made excuses. None blamed Laura. None blamed the board. They blamed themselves. That mattered. I slowly closed the folder without opening it. You don't owe me apologies. Daniel frowned. We do. No. I looked at each of them. You owe yourselves honesty. The room fell silent. I spent years protecting everyone. I continued calmly. That made it easy for people to believe difficult decisions solve themselves. They don't. They simply become someone else's burden. Maya lowered her eyes. We helped create that. Yes. She accepted the answer without arguing. Then I smiled faintly. But recognizing it means you don't have to repeat it. For the first time since arriving, their shoulders relaxed. Not because they had been forgiven, because they had been understood. 2 weeks later, we announced a new initiative. Instead of aggressively recruiting Horizon's remaining employees, Lawson created an open transition program. Anyone affected by corporate restructuring could apply. No favoritism, no revenge, only merit. Richard handed me the proposal before the announcement. You could have hired only Horizon staff. I could have, but you didn't. I shook my head. This isn't about defeating them. It's about building something healthier. He nodded approvingly. I hoped you'd say that. The transition program exceeded every expectation. Experienced engineers found new opportunities. Young analysts received training instead of rejection. Technicians whose factories had closed joined new production teams. Every acceptance letter carried the same final sentence. Your past does not define your future. Your work will. One afternoon, I walked through our largest manufacturing facility. Machines moved with steady rhythm. Workers greeted supervisors by name. Problems were discussed openly instead of hidden. It wasn't perfect. No company ever was. But people weren't pretending perfection existed. That alone made us stronger. A young engineer approached nervously. Mr. Cole. Yes. I wanted to thank you. For what? I worked at Horizon. I know. I thought losing that job meant my career was over. He smiled awkwardly. You gave me another chance. I shook my head gently. You earned it. He stood a little straighter after hearing those words. As he walked away, Richard joined me. You've become popular. I'd rather become unnecessary. He laughed, still thinking like an operations man. Always. That evening I visited the old industrial district where Horizon's first office had once stood. The basement building still existed. The leaking roof had finally been repaired. A small family-owned design studio now occupied the space. Bright lights spilled through the windows. Young employees argued enthusiastically over sketches taped to the walls. No polished marble. No executive lounge. Just people building something together. I watched from across the street for several minutes before turning away. Some memories deserved gratitude instead of regret. A week later, an unexpected envelope arrived at my office. There was no return address. Inside rested a handwritten letter. It was from Laura. The handwriting was slower than I remembered. Less confident. More honest. Ethan, I spent weeks trying to decide whether writing this would be selfish. Maybe it still is. I kept replaying every meeting where I chose ambition over trust. Every time I dismissed your concerns because they complicated my plans. I told myself I wanted to save the company. The truth is, I wanted to prove I could replace you. I never asked whether replacing you was the right question. Losing the company hurt. Realizing who I became hurt far more. I don't expect forgiveness. I only hope I never repeat those choices again. Laura. I folded the letter carefully, then placed it inside my desk drawer. Not hidden. Not displayed. Simply kept. Richard noticed the thoughtful expression on my face. Good news. Necessary news. He didn't ask to read it. Instead, he poured 2 cups of tea. We stood by the window overlooking the harbor. The same harbor where, months earlier, storm clouds had gathered before the market collapse. Now the water reflected a calm evening sky. Richard lifted his cup. To surviving. I smiled. No. He looked at me curiously. To learning. He nodded. That's better. Outside, ships continued arriving and departing. Businesses would rise. Others would fail. Markets would boom and collapse again. None of that could be controlled. Character could. And for the first time in many years, I felt no need to carry the weight of the entire world on my shoulders. The invitation arrived almost a year after I had walked out of Horizon's headquarters. It wasn't embossed with gold lettering. It carried no corporate logo, just a simple white envelope. National Leadership Forum. Keynote speaker invitation. Theme: building organizations that outlive their founders. I stared at the paper for several seconds before setting it down. Richard looked up from his desk. You don't seem excited. I'm thinking. About declining? About whether I have anything worth saying. He smiled. If you believe that, you wouldn't still be rewriting our training manuals at midnight. I sighed. Old habits. They're becoming better habits. A week later, I stood backstage inside the largest auditorium I'd ever entered. Executives, entrepreneurs, university students, government officials, thousands of people filled the seats. The moderator introduced me. The man who quietly built one company and quietly walked away from it. The audience applauded. I stepped onto the stage. The lights were brighter than I expected. For a few moments, I simply looked at the crowd. Then I spoke. When people tell my story, they usually ask the wrong question. Silence spread through the auditorium. They ask why I didn't fight to keep my position. They ask why I stayed silent. They ask why I didn't destroy the people who betrayed me. I paused. The better question is this. Why did everyone believe one person could keep an unhealthy system alive forever? No one moved. I continued. A company isn't healthy because one person works harder. It's healthy because responsibility is shared. If removing one employee causes collapse, then the collapse began long before that employee left. Several audience members began taking notes. Others simply listened. I wasn't defeated when I signed my resignation. I was tired. Tired people often mistake endurance for loyalty. I did. I believed sacrificing myself proved commitment. It didn't. It only delayed consequences. The room remained completely silent. I looked toward the final rows. I've been called patient, strategic, even ruthless. I don't think any of those words matter. What matters is knowing the difference between helping people grow and helping them avoid responsibility. The applause didn't begin immediately. People were thinking. That meant more than applause ever could. After the forum ended, dozens of attendees approached. Some asked about leadership. Others wanted business advice. A young woman, probably no older than 25, waited until the line had almost disappeared. She held a notebook against her chest. Mr. Cole, yes. My father built a small manufacturing company. I nodded. He refuses to delegate. He says nobody can do things correctly. I smiled faintly. I used to believe something similar. What should I tell him? I thought for a long moment before answering. Tell him this. If people only succeed while you're present, then you haven't built a company. You've built dependence. She wrote every word carefully. Thank you. As she walked away, I realized something. The story no longer belonged only to me. Its lessons belonged to anyone willing to hear them. Autumn returned to the city almost exactly 1 year after the boardroom vote. The maple trees lining the boulevard outside Lawson's headquarters had turned deep shades of amber and crimson. Life had settled into something I had once believed impossible. Balance. Not perfection, just balance. Richard officially retired that October. The board unanimously asked me to succeed him as chief executive officer. During the meeting, one director smiled. This time, we'd like your answer before preparing the paperwork. Laughter filled the room. I laughed with them. Then I looked around the table. Every department was represented. Every major decision required discussion instead of obedience. No one expected a single person to rescue everyone else. Only then did I answer. I accept. Not because I wanted the title. Because I trusted the people sitting beside me. That made all the difference. Several weeks later, I happened to pass the former Horizon headquarters. The company's name had already been removed from the building. Workers were installing a new sign for another corporation that had purchased the property. The glass reflected the afternoon sun just as it always had. Buildings rarely remembered the people inside them. People remembered themselves. As I stood there for a moment, someone spoke behind me. Ethan. I turned. Laura. She looked different. Not broken. Not defeated. Simply quieter. She wore ordinary business clothes instead of expensive executive suits. No assistants. No entourage. She noticed me looking toward the building. I heard they're turning 3 floors into engineering labs. I heard the same. A gentle silence settled between us. Finally, she smiled. I found work. I'm glad. It's a nonprofit. They help family-owned factories modernize. Mostly small businesses. I nodded. That sounds meaningful. It is. She hesitated. I spend more time listening now. I noticed. She laughed softly. I suppose I deserve that. Then I remembered the resignation letter. The boardroom applause. The months of secret meetings. The signatures collected behind closed doors. You aren't asking for the employees. She froze. You're asking for Horizon. You want me to carry the weight again. Her shoulders slowly dropped. Neither of us spoke. Finally I asked, do you remember our first office? She looked confused. The basement. Yes. The roof leaked every winter. A faint smile appeared despite herself. We used buckets. And old towels. You slept there for 3 nights after the server crashed. I remember. So do I. I looked at her steadily. Back then we solved problems together. She nodded weakly. Somewhere along the way. I continued. You stopped asking how much I was carrying. Tears formed in her eyes. I thought you enjoyed it. I was surviving it. She covered her mouth with one trembling hand. I never realized. I know. The words carried no bitterness. Only exhaustion. She wiped her eyes quickly. So that's it. Yes. You'll watch us collapse? I answered after a long pause. I'll watch you face the consequences of decisions you insisted were correct. She looked at me for what felt like an eternity. Then she whispered, I don't think I ever understood you. No. You understood what I could do for you. Those words ended the conversation. She nodded once, turned slowly, walked toward the elevator without looking back. The doors closed. I remained standing in the hallway long after she disappeared. Not because I regretted my decision, because endings rarely felt satisfying, even when they were necessary. The next morning, Richard entered my office carrying a thin folder. Horizon has begun selling assets. So soon. They're running out of cash. He placed the folder on my desk. They've also lost 2 more board members. I opened the file. Resignation letters. Emergency financing requests. Supplier defaults. One page caught my attention. An internal memo. Employee confidence has fallen to historic lows. Several senior managers intend to resign within the month. I closed the folder. Richard studied my expression. No victory? There isn't one. They betrayed you. They also built part of my life. He nodded thoughtfully. That makes this harder. It makes it real. Richard walked toward the window. The industry keeps asking why Lawson remained stable while everyone else panicked. And what do you tell them? The truth. He smiled. I tell them stability wasn't built during the crisis. It was built long before anyone believed one was coming. Outside, another wave of grim financial headlines spread across the city. Inside Horizon, executives still searched for someone to blame. Inside Lawson, people quietly continued working. The difference had never been intelligence. It had never been luck. It had been one simple choice repeated over years. Prepare or pretend. And at last, everyone was beginning to see which choice carried the greater cost.